All right, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all here tonight. So for tonight's topic, I was trying to brainstorm. How do I make this as awkward as possible? So I'll start off with a hypothetical question. Fill in the blank. We don't talk about a blank. Bruno. That's only a matter of time for it, Bruno. Yeah, if you don't know who Bruno is, you should watch Encanto on Disney. But I think you all know who Bruno is. So thank you. Hey, what else don't we talk about? Politics, yes. I think I heard money and religion, or something in religion. All good answers, all social taboos. Ding ding. Yes, we don't talk about sex. And actually, Phil is the winner tonight because I decided to do a class on the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, the one book in the Bible that we do not talk about. I mean, we do talk about it, but we don't really talk about it, do we? So consider this a trigger warning for anyone who does not want to hear about said book tonight. But first, a bit of an anecdote, and this is a second-hand anecdote. Andrea was telling me about, she was at a wedding once, and I don't recall who was the preacher. It was probably somebody we all know, but for one of his scriptures that he quoted from the Song of Solomon. So I'm just gonna, I don't know which verse he quoted, but yeah, this is 7:1 in the Song of Solomon, so brace yourselves. O noble daughter, your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master hand. Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon by the gate of Bath Rabbim. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon, which looks towards Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in the tresses. And according to my wife, I guess the preacher decided to go on and explain how now everything that Solomon has described about his lover, well, officially, I don't know who was getting married, but they now belong to the husband-to-be. And it was just a very awkward interchange because there was like a lot of flushing of cheeks, a lot of sideways glance, a lot of giggling apparently. But I don't know. So I guess it's a little bit awkward to hear something like this uttered in a church. I feel kind of awkward right now speaking of Song of Solomon up here. So I guess my background with the Song of Solomon is it's been used when you talk about physical romance, about God's plan for reproduction. I mean, it's part of the Bible, so it's got to be God-breathed, right? But beyond that, I don't hear too much about it spoken about. So I'm going to pose the question to the group. So why is the Song of Solomon awkward? Why is it kind of taboo? Why is it something that we don't mention too often? And if you got like a single word that you want to yell out or a single phrase you want to yell out, go for it. All right.
Some of it's pretty descriptive.
Pretty descriptive, yes. That's actually my first point, that maybe it's taboo because it's explicit. It's nothing held back. And I guess to expound upon that, well, yeah, it is very literal. There is no beating around the bush. When Solomon talks about his lover, he mentioned every body part specifically. On top of that, he uses metaphors to kind of describe it further. But I'm going to keep the question open for so far. Anybody else have any ideas why the Song of Solomon is kind of awkward? I mean, there's a few different things that I kind of observed. Phil?
Your mom or dad or son or daughter might be in, grandmother.
Yep. Moms, dads, sons, daughters. It's kind of hard to have everyone listening in, but that is also another good talking point. Intimacy. It's a very intimate subject matter, and here it is laid bare for everyone to listen to and talk about. I mean, it's kind of like peering into a bedroom window almost at the wrong time, or I guess the right time, depending on who's the party involved. But so yes, so explicitness, intimacy, that is strangely shared. Anybody else got any thoughts on why we don't talk about it? Justine?
I think a lot of, or some of it is just the church is afraid to talk about it and afraid, especially to maybe get the kids involved in that and afraid of what they would do with it.
Yeah, that's another good point. Age appropriate. That's the question, is the Song of Solomon appropriate for everybody? Age-based, or situation-based? These are all good reasons, I think. And I guess just to touch on a little bit more of each of these. So it was mentioned that, Larry mentioned it's explicit, that it doesn't hold anything back. It's kind of weird. The Song of Solomon, it's kind of unique in the Old Testament. Throughout most of the Old Testament, there's like a lot of exchange in wisdom. There's a lot of discussion about genealogies in the Old Testament. You can look for good advice, words to live by in Psalms. You can do a history lesson, look in the Chronicles and Kings. There's like a lot that you would talk about in the Old Testament, but this is like a love letter, right smack in the middle of everything. So it's like it's almost like a different book when you're reading the Song of Solomon here. And so I think that's kind of like a shock to everyone, is that it's not what you'd expect from the Bible. I mean, I guess outside the scope of the Bible, it's, in general in society, it's kind of rude to talk about these things. I mean, you don't really talk about sex at your job. You don't talk about sex at your school. On TV, I mean, if the FCC has anything to say, it's like a certain level of decency, and sexual content is not one of those, unless you pay for cable, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a different topic. It's just, I think it's unique is what. And actually, I looked into some of the history of the Song of Solomon, and it is attributed to Solomon. Obviously, the first phrase opens by saying this is a song of songs of Solomon. I forgot what it said exactly, but it actually attributes Solomon as being the author. But it was written between 1000 and 2000 BC at some point there, and at one point before it became officially Bible canon, it was kind of up in the air for just this reason. It's excuse me. The rabbis were unsure: is this a productive work? Should we be including this with the other holy books? And I guess there was a lot of back and forth with it, but I think ultimately what the deciding factor was that not only was it written by one of the Old Testament's wisest men, but it also was it was like an allegory for what God's love is with His people. Did you raise your hand, Linda? I'm sorry. Looked at the wrong time, it was the wrong place. So historically, it has always been awkward. I guess throughout another biblical scholar, I think C.H. Spurgeon, what's his name? I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he says that you shouldn't, like, the Song of Songs is not for the uninitiated. Like, it's a very difficult book to study because you can come to different conclusions, I guess. You can, at different points in your life, it means different things, but that's another recurring theme. So let me try to regroup here. I guess this notion that this is explicit, like, is there anything wrong with this explicit kind of behavior? Eddie?
I don't know if this answers your question. It might not. But I think that the church is way behind on this topic. I think a lot of that is because we just talked about the whole different generations. And traditionalists, if you told them not to do something that was just kind of, okay, I'm not going to do it. So you're not going to talk about this, you're not going to do this until you're married, and that's okay. And today, a lot of churches are ran, the elders, the senior members are traditionalists. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think their mindset was, you don't talk about it until you get married, and that's a marriage thing. Whereas now, I think probably 6, 7 years old, you're exposed to way more of this than we ever were, or they ever were at that age. And if they have a question and you kind of tell them, don't talk about it, they're just going to get on Google, and then Google's going to tell them whatever they want to know. And so I think the whole church as a whole is way behind on this topic and how to deal with it and how to bring it up and broach it. And I think a lot of that's just because in the past, people were more, again, I'm repeating myself, people were more okay with waiting until marriage, and now it's just not a social norm, right? It's not accepted socially, especially with what they have access to. And you don't really need to want access to it. Most of the songs, I think, if you turn on any radio station, probably 2 out of 3 songs is going to have innuendos or going to be just blatantly talking about sex, depending on what radio station you're listening to. Any of these commercials you watch, especially on, like, if I gave everyone my phone, if she has a tablet that she typically uses and it's all about kids, they're going to play kid ads. But if you give her my phone, they're going to show her ads about roping horses or bending metal. But then they're also going to throw in adult ads, more geared towards me, that shouldn't be geared towards her. And so I think that's also a big part of it, too.
Yeah, you're at that right demographic where they can throw the most raunchiest ads at you, I suppose. But
And I would say, personally, that I think, the elders and the more senior individuals should be talking about it because they've had way more time to practice. And so they're going to be way more versed.
That is one of the punchlines, after all. Without meeting anybody, looking anybody in the eye, many of us here should not be strangers to the content of the Song of Solomon. So, but yeah, I'm trying to adjust my language so the kids don't understand. But you do raise a good point, Eddie. The social norms around us, be it for sexuality or sexual abuse, they're changing. One of the takeaways from that Stewards of Light class that we did was if you don't really tell your kid what the different body parts are, what the different, no-no zones are, if you use euphemisms instead of actually saying, all right, this is a penis. Sorry, not to be blunt, but we've come to that point in society that you have to say, children have to know what the right words are, and that you have to set boundaries. And if the kids never know what the boundaries are, if there's nothing blunt, well, that's the thing. That there's an information gap there, and I think that is something that, unfortunately, we have to be at that point. But yeah, needless to say, no one here is a stranger to the Song of Solomon.
So, I on what Eddie said, they really need to start really talking about this a lot more, because if they go into like a trade, let me tell you something, that's a whole different world there. They're going to learn everything they need to know in the first month. And if you don't want them to know it right, then you probably should start teaching at a younger age. I mean, you don't have to be near as graphic with it, but you probably should really start stepping into it, I think.
I remember one of my sister's friends in high school. Her friend was Indian, I believe, very conservative Indian, and pretty much it was my sister and one of her other friends had to explain to her Indian friend that babies didn't come from storks, because she was led to believe all her life that that's what her parents decided to teach her, is that babies come from storks. And I don't know, it's ignorance. I mean, she's going to learn eventually at some point, but yeah. We do live in that world, though. That's everything surrounding here. And there will be a culture shock with the rest of the world if something isn't communicated. So, oops. Sorry, my phone fell asleep. I lost my train of thought. I apologize, everyone. Oh, yeah, Chrissy.
I think it's hard to talk about sex because it is something that's sacred, and so you don't want to talk about it like it's nothing. You want to talk about it like it's something. So it's a delicate line that we have to balance of talking about it. Like Eddie said, our kids will find out one way or another, and it's up to us who's going to direct that dialogue. Mm-hmm. And so I know for me it's kind of hard because I feel like it is something sacred. So you need to talk about it in the right way, but it could be talked about so much more. And I think one of the things that we have to understand is that the devil likes to screw up God's perfect plan. And so God is the God of sex. He created it for our enjoyment, for procreation. And if the devil can somehow screw it up, so we don't talk about it, so we don't tell our kids how good it is, so people who, there are people who have sex on their wedding night and feel dirty afterwards because it's something that it's dirty, wrong, and horrible, except for you should do it with the one person that you're supposed to spend your life with. It's something I heard on the radio. That's kind of the dialogue we give teenagers, I feel like. It's wrong up to a certain point. So I think that shift is really hard. But I think a lot of it is the devil likes to screw up things that God designed as good and perfect. So it all started in the garden. Adam and Eve had it right, so then they screwed it up.
Can't have nice things. Yeah, that's unfortunate. But it's true, though. I mean, anything that is good and sacred and powerful in this world, it's prime target for the devil. You did say something, you touched on something interesting, because in the Song of Solomon, the Shulamite lover, there's something she says multiple times. She says, what was it? She says, she's addressing her friends that are kind of like the third party observers to this interchange. And she says, man, I wrote it down, but I'm trying not to find it. Well, it says, to paraphrase, I apologize, I lost my quote, but she said, do not welcome love before its time. And she said it 3 times, I believe. I mean, she said it after describing how powerful this emotion was, how lost she felt, and then finally relieved to find her husband. She said this, after being beaten by the guards in her dream, and then finding out that her husband's waiting in the garden for her. So I guess the stern warning that to me it seemed like it was a stern warning that this is powerful stuff. This is not to be trifled with. I think it's in line with what you said. It's something sacred. And yeah, I think talking about how the world views it, it could be screwed up. It can be, promiscuity is everywhere in the world. So, I guess I want to circle back to the point about just about intimacy. I guess also what you said, Chrissy, about there's like a certain shame associated with this. Anybody know what the acronym PDA stands for? A public display of affection, or a portable digital assistant, depending on the context. But a PDA, when you see strangers in the street kissing, becoming intimate with each other in public, kind of makes you look away, not look away. Say, why don't they have any like shame? Don't they have any boundaries? I think having the Song of Solomon, as frank as it is, it's almost like being privy to something that you shouldn't be privy to. And because it is so intimate, and because it is something so personal, it's kind of weird that we're kind of observing this. But, I mean, there comes a point where this awkward book becomes not awkward. Like if it was one of us writing this book or writing a poem to our spouse, it wouldn't be awkward at all. It'd be something beautiful, something poetic. And I think, I don't know if this is what made the book so valuable and accepted as being valuable, but this kind of shows like Solomon's more human side, I feel like. The fact that he is kind of head over heels for his bride. I guess it is a good reminder that we are humans as Christians. We're not just scholars. We are lovers. We are emotional people. So that was one of my takeaways from the book anyways. I don't have too much time left, so I'm going to try to distill my thoughts here. When I mentioned that the book became canon, was when someone made the connection that this can be an allegory to how God views his people. That was the Old Testament. Do you think the same applies to the New Testament? Would you say Jesus and his bride, us the church, is there a similar allegory? Like, is the Song of Solomon in any way similar to Christ's love for us, I wonder? Any thoughts? I think there's a compelling argument to say that there is. Caleb?
So in different types of languages, there's distinctions between types of love or whatever. I don't know this specific passage, what they're talking about, but contextually it appears that it's between a husband and wife. But I do think that, the Bible says a lot about the love between a husband and a wife and, the depth of that love connecting to Christ's love for the church. So I can definitely see there being a connection. I don't know if it's how direct that is, but it would be nice, if our language did distinct between the love. It would be easier to tell other guys that you love them if there was more of a distinction. And on the topic of sex, sometimes we rank the sins in the church and in our lives, and because of, I think, a lot of things in our culture and the Christian culture, we rank sexual sins as, unforgivable or at a higher level. One thing I was going to think about, we were talking about tonight, there was a study that we did. I don't know how old I was at the time, but we did it with, it was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris. And unfortunately, recently he just split with his wife, and he's not a Christian anymore. But in a lot of his struggles recently, he shared that he made a lot of decisions in that book, which because dating goodbye, essentially you should be courting people. The only reason you should be romantically involved is if you are going to marry that person. Because dating is bad, and there's a facade, and there's a whole scene, and there's a lot of sin involved in datings. But he, decades later said that the issue with his previous mindset was he was doing it out of fear. And he was kind of ranking sexual sin above everything else. And, he regretted having made the book because he did it purely out of fear, and fear for himself and fear for other people. But I think a lot of times in the church, that's another reason it's hard to talk about, because there's a hierarchy. We can argue about what that is, but there certainly is a hierarchy in how we view sin.
Yeah. I think it ties back to what Eddie was saying with the generational differences, of how he kind of passed it on as what's worse than others. So. Bill?
Yeah. So the one I think that talks about in the New Testament, does this relate to God's relationship to his people? In Ephesians 5, it talks about the relationship between husbands and wives. And he gets to the end of it, and the point he's making is this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church, right? Earlier, the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. And it talks about the relationship one to another as the relationship between the church and God, between people and God, between his people and God. And so marriages, these relationships, the relationship in Song of Solomon is meant to be an image of that perfect relationship between Christ and his people. Just in the same way, and I think this goes back to our hierarchy of sin that Caleb was talking about, that's something that's very easy for us to see. And when that's corrupted, it strikes us as wrong, but we forget that we are meant to be in the image of God as well. And so any sin is a corruption of us and our ability to be an image of God, a reflection of God. And so I think we struggle because this is one of those things that we know the church is important. We know God's relationship to his people is important. But so visible sins against that, it feels more wrong because it's something that I think is easier for us to see. We can see relationships. It's harder for us to see God and ourselves or in one another in the same way that we see the relationship, we see marriage. But those individual sins are just as destructive in our ability to image God. But to come back to your question, I think Ephesians 5 does a good job of saying kind of that Song of Solomon can be used in that way, in the same way that our acting like God's people reflect on Christ and reflect on God. Our marriages and the type of marriage that's described in the Song of Solomon and passion can be a reflection of the passion between Christ and his people as well. And then the people back to Christ. The same way that the early church in Acts 2 had such a passionate desire to act as Christ's bride.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess thank you, Bill. I think that is the one good takeaway if you are trying to distill some wisdom out of this for non-sexual purposes. I think there's something to be said there. I mean, this can be an awkward book. There is stuff that we don't talk about regularly there. It's kind of hard to apply that to the love of Christ, but yeah, I think if you remember just like the intimacy that is talked about here, and just kind of having that level of deep relationship, be it with your spouse or on a spiritual level with Christ, and I think that's the best thing we can take away from this for now. But I think there's more to be said on this, but I'm kind of tongue-tied tonight. Nancy?
I guess I'm a baby boomer, and when my kids were little, I had a series on how to introduce sex to your children. And we started from a very
Hmm.
And I think that's something that needs to be taught at home, not at school. And that's why, you know, we talked about the things, and there's appropriate ages for different things.
Hmm.
And I think there's appropriate actions, even like in front of your kids. I mean, my husband might have some dog and stuff, but we would do other things. And I think sometimes some people, I'm not saying in church, but in general, they kind of go overboard and it gets a little bit too easy between things, and they kind of lose some of the boundaries, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you wouldn't talk about things like that in front of your little kids.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think it has to start at home, and I think we need to educate our kids to those things, because there's, especially today, there's so many things out there. I mean, even young men, I mean, there's, you know, sex trafficking and all kinds of stuff that's going on. And I do think it's important that we teach our kids about that and talk about it, because when I was a kid, you didn't talk about it. And I don't think that was a good thing either. So I just think it needs to start at home.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as a parent, you have that responsibility, and yeah, it's something you have to do, I think. I agree. And striking a balance of what's appropriate or what isn't, that's also something to kind of discern. So, parents' wisdom. Oh, Alexis?
One thing that I was thinking of comparing a husband and wife and Jesus in the church was that physically there are things that your spouse sees and knows about you that nobody else does. And just as Jesus, you know, he could see our hearts and our minds that, you know, nobody else can see. Sometimes not even ourselves can see it, but Jesus can see it in us. So I think that's one comparison that could be similar. You know, there's that intimacy that's there between a spouse where nobody else knows that about you or nobody has seen that. But then with Jesus, it's like there are a lot of things that nobody else knows and nobody else has seen except for him. So
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. It's the best thing about a spouse. They kind of complete the two halves, right? So it's one of the gaps. And we're all incomplete without Jesus anyway, so it's an excellent point, Alexis. Larry?
I just want to bring up that with the Old Testament, it had to meet certain requirements in order for it to be in the scriptures. They had to be inspired, which God's word is. So there's a reason God had Solomon write these intimate words down.
Yep.
Because it was to be for the marriage, okay? Not prior. And I agree with Nancy, it should be the parents that discuss these kind of things with their children. It should never have gotten to the point to where it was up to the schools.
Yep. So the value is there. There's definitely value in that book. So, in the interest of time, I think I reached the end of my time, so I'm gonna thank everybody for participation. I think we had some good discussion tonight. Hopefully, got the gears turning. I think there's more to be said. I think we have a lot of parents, a lot of grandparents here. I think pretty much everyone is a parent or grandparent almost. So, I ask that God kind of fill us with wisdom when it comes to this subject matter, and that next time we address this book, it'll be one iota less awkward, I suppose. So I would give a quick prayer before I end. Father above, thank you for this opportunity to speak before the congregation. I ask that your word fills our hearts and allows us to really appreciate what you've given to us through your word, biologically through our bodies. And I ask that you just help us to Help us to live our lives the way you see it. Help us to raise our children as you see fit. And just overall, just help us to remember that this is all part of your grand design here. And I pray for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.